Have you ever felt like you're stuck in an endless cycle of depression? Imagine waking up each day feeling like you're drowning in darkness, unable to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Well, you're not alone, because depression is a battle that millions face every day. Fortunately, there are many proven methods that can help tackle this struggle, and in this video, we'll be delving into the cycle of depression and uncovering strategies you could use to break free from it. There are two types of depression: clinical and non-clinical. For today, we'll be focusing on the non-clinical aspect of depression. So how does the cycle of depression look like? It usually starts with an inciting event. This could be a breakup or failing a test. For normal people, they are usually able to recover from these events, but people with depression will struggle to recover. Why is that? This is due to cognitive bias, which occurs whenever there's an inciting event. Cognitive bias shapes the way that we perceive things. For people with depression, cognitive biases cause their mind to see certain things very negatively, even though they might be objectively better than it seems. There are a set of cognitive biases that come into play whenever an inciting event occurs. They are negative interpretation of ambiguous events, selection bias towards negative, and overgeneralization of memories. First, let's delve into negative interpretation of ambiguous events. Studies have shown that people who are depressed will see ambiguous things and interpret them in the worst ways possible. Imagine that you are at the pantry in your office, and your colleague doesn't greet you when they enter to grab a cup of tea. If your mind is depressed, it's going to take this ambiguous information and interpret it in the most negative way possible, causing you to think that the person dislikes you, even though there's no concrete evidence to prove that. The second cognitive bias is a selection bias towards the negative. Imagine you are in a situation when someone gives you a positive and negative feedback. If you are feeling depressed, you will have the tendency to disregard the positive feedback and only focus on the negative feedback. The third cognitive bias is the overgeneralization of memories. Let's say you're going through a day and you have one positive, one neutral, and one negative event. The positive event is a good performance review from your boss at work. The neutral event is encountering a colleague at the pantry, but they didn't greet you. The negative event is being told by someone on a dating app that they are no longer interested in you. If you are a non-depressed person, you'll see these events for how it is. But if you are depressed, you will tend to completely disregard the positive event. The neutral event then gets converted to a negative event, which leads to the person thinking that no one likes them. The negative event stays a negative event, so the person will believe that they are unlovable and will be alone forever. So, whilst the non-depressed person breaks even in terms of how they perceive their day, the depressed person has two negatives, meaning they now see their world as objectively worse. When this happens, the depressed person will feel that everything in their lives is going wrong, and they'll conclude that they are a failure. This is the crux of negative self-attitude, which is the key hallmark of depression. So now that we have discussed these cognitive biases, how do we tackle or treat these issues? The main solution is to tackle the problem of perception, as this is what propagates and perpetuates the cycle of depression. Studies have shown that people who are resilient perceive setbacks differently to people who aren't resilient. For example, if a resilient person fails a test, they will see it as a learning opportunity to improve themselves. Whereas someone who is depressed will perceive it as them being a failure, which leads to lack of motivation and creates a vicious cycle. So, to tackle the issue of perception, we can perform a couple of exercises to tackle those cognitive biases. Firstly, to tackle negative interpretation of ambiguous events, we can perform an exercise called cognitive reframing, which is also performed in cognitive behavioral therapy. The goal of this exercise is to practice having your mind look at things in a more nuanced and balanced way. We want to be able to weigh the positives and negatives, as when we are depressed, all we see are the negatives. To start, think of an event that you view as negative. Take a sheet of paper and ask yourself, what's the real evidence that proves this is negative? And what is the evidence you have to the contrary? For example, Let's say that you had an argument with a friend which left you upset and hurt, and you feel that the friendship will fall apart because of it. The evidence supporting the negativity could be that the argument was heated and both of you said hurtful things, so it's natural to feel upset about it. The evidence to the contrary could be that both of you had disagreements in the past and were able to work through them, indicating the strength of the friendship. This argument might lead to better communication and understanding, which could help the growth of the friendship. So you take one thing that is negative and try to see what is positive there to practice having a more balanced perspective towards things. Next up, to tackle selection bias, we can perform the mentality materiality exercise. This exercise comes from a Buddhist text called the Visuddhimagga, which means the path of purification. So, mentality materiality is all about the purification of your perception. The goal of this exercise is to acknowledge that everything you see in the world has a materiality to it, which is separate from our mentality. Materiality refers to the concrete facts, evidence, and objective reality of the situation, separate from the individual's thoughts and emotions. Mentality refers to the thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and biases that the individual is experiencing in the situation. What you'll discover is that 99% of your perception doesn't come from the outside world, which is the materiality. It comes from within you, which is your mentality. For example, you are scrolling through Instagram and you came across a friend's vacation photo. This made you feel inadequate about your life. The materiality is the vacation photo posted by your friend. The mentality is the feeling of inadequacy. Notice that the feeling of inadequacy is something your mind attaches to the photo, and that the feeling didn't come from the photo itself, because the photo is simply a representation of a highlight reel and not the full picture of your friend's life. As such, to compare your whole life with a photo is not a fair comparison to make, as social media often portrays a curated version of reality. You don't see people often posting about their struggles on Instagram, do you? So, as we begin to see things as they are instead of our way of interpreting them, this will change the way we see the world. Instead of seeing everything in our life as negative, we'll just see it as neutral. Lastly, to tackle the issue of overgeneralization, we can perform an exercise called removing I from the equation. If you look at someone that is depressed, they tend to feel they are always at fault. Common thoughts that pop up are, "These people are better off without me," or "I suck." Notice how everything is targeted at me. So, overgeneralized thinking has to do with I thinking. To combat this, think of a scenario and pay attention to any thoughts you have in your mind that is overgeneralizing and thinking about you. Subsequently, redirect those thoughts by taking a moment to consider what could be going on in other people's life or mind that elicits their behavior. For example, as you are walking into the office pantry, you encounter your colleague. You said hi to them, but they didn't respond back. If you are depressed, you might overgeneralize and think that your colleague didn't respond because they dislike you. But instead of negatively redirecting this thought towards yourself, think about what your colleague might be going through. For example, they might be mentally preoccupied or simply going through a rough day. Doing this will promote a more balanced way of thinking instead of putting all the blame on ourselves. So, to summarize, the cycle of depression starts with an inciting event, which often leads to cognitive biases, such as negative interpretation of ambiguous events, selection bias towards the negative, and overgeneralization of memories. To tackle the negative interpretation of ambiguous events, you can practice cognitive reframing by finding evidence for not only the negative, but the positive as well. To tackle selection bias towards negative, you can practice the mentality materiality exercise by seeing things as they are, separate from your internal thoughts. Lastly, to tackle the issue of overgeneralization of memories, practice removing I from the equation by considering the thoughts and emotions of the other person. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, I would greatly appreciate if you could like, share, and subscribe, as it'll help signal to the YouTube algorithm that this content is worth sharing, and it'll recommend my video to a larger audience. I look forward to creating more videos like this to help and inspire people. Together, let's spread the word and help more people live better and healthier lives.